The scream came before the silence, and the silence was worse. I was standing near the fuel counter on Meridian Station when it happened, one hand still holding a cup of bitter synth coffee, and I watched a Cadron male jump back from a woman like she had caught fire. His long silver arms flew up, his breathing tubes flared open in panic. Every eye on that concourse turned toward her, and for one long moment nobody moved. Her name was Illyra Sen. I did not know her name yet. All I knew, in that first second, was that a grown alien male, nearly 7 feet tall, built like he could crack a bulkhead with his shoulder, had just backed away from a woman half his size, like she was something dangerous, something to be avoided, something to be afraid of. She did not cry, she did not shout. She simply stood there, spine straight, chin lifted, while the entire concourse watched her get rejected in public for what I would later learn was not the first time, and not even close to the last. I set my coffee down. I do not know why I walked toward her instead of walking away, the way every sensible person on that station had learned to do. Maybe it was the way her hands were shaking even though her face was not. Maybe it was simple curiosity, the kind that gets humans into trouble across the galaxy. Maybe some part of me already knew that this moment was going to change my life, though if you had told me that then, I would have laughed at you. Meridian Station sat at the crossing point of 4 trade lanes, a floating city of steel and glass, and 100 different species trying not to step on each other's customs. Humans were new here, still finding our place, still being watched carefully by species who had been flying between stars since before we figured out fire. We were tolerated, occasionally respected, rarely understood. The Cadron were one of the oldest species on the station, tall and pale-skinned, with eyes like polished stone, proud of their bloodlines the way old families on Earth used to be proud of crests and titles. They did not simply date. They bonded, a process I did not understand yet, something written into their biology so deep that an entire culture had been built around avoiding it going wrong. And apparently, going near Illyra Sen meant it could go very wrong. "You should not be near her," a voice said beside me. I turned. An older Cadron trader named Vesk stood there, his stone eyes fixed on me with something close to pity. He had sold me parts before, always fair, always polite. He was not being rude now. He seemed genuinely worried. "Why not?" I asked. "She carries the hollow line," he said, like that explained everything. It did not explain anything to me, but I noticed something interesting. He did not say it with disgust. He said it the way you might talk about a storm system or a fault line under a city. Not evil, just dangerous. Something you respect and stay away from, not something you hate. I looked back at Illyra. The male who had rejected her was already walking away fast, his friends closing around him, throwing glances back at her like she might still reach out and grab them from 20 feet away. She watched him go without expression, but I saw her hands curl into fists at her sides before she made them relax again, one finger at a time, like she had practiced doing that many times before. "What happens," I asked Vesk, "if someone does bond with her?" He went quiet for a moment. Traders on Meridian Station usually loved to talk, loved to trade gossip as much as goods, but this time he chose his words carefully. "The last male who tried," he said slowly, "did not wake up the same person." That should have been my warning to walk away. Instead, it was the moment I stopped being able to look away. I am not a hero. I want to say that clearly, right at the start, because everything that happened afterward might make it sound like I planned some grand rescue. I did not. I was a cargo hauler with a small ship and smaller savings, working routes between Meridian and 3 mining colonies, trying to save enough credits to fix my ship's failing engine coil before it stranded me somewhere ugly. I was not looking for a cause. I was not looking for her. But I kept watching her walk across that concourse alone, past groups of aliens who went quiet as she passed, past whispers she pretended not to hear, and something in my chest tightened in a way I did not enjoy and could not ignore. Over the following days, I noticed her more than I meant to. She worked in the station's medical archive, cataloging records from a dozen species, precise and quiet, and clearly very good at her job. She ate lunch alone at the same table every day, at the edge of the food court, facing the wall instead of the room, as if she had gotten tired of watching people notice her and then look away. Twice more I saw males approach her. Once, a young trader who did not know her reputation yet, smiling, clearly interested, clearly about to ask her something. Someone leaned over and whispered in his ear. His smile died. He found somewhere else to be within seconds. The second time was worse. An older cadron, someone with enough confidence in his own bloodline that he was willing to risk it, sat down across from her and actually spoke to her for almost 10 minutes. I watched from a distance, feeling strangely nervous on her behalf, hoping for her. She laughed once, a small, surprised sound, like laughing was a muscle she rarely used anymore. Then he asked something. I could not hear the words, but I saw her face change, saw the hope drain out of it fast, replaced by the same practiced blankness. He stood up a moment later, said something formal and cold, and walked away without looking back. She sat there alone again, staring at her hands. I found out later what he had asked her. He wanted to know exactly how her last bonding attempt had failed, in clinical detail, the way you might ask about a mechanical fault before buying a used ship. He was not interested in her. He was interested in whether she was safe enough to be worth the risk. When the answer was no, he left, the same as all the others. That night, I could not stop thinking about her. I told myself it was simple sympathy, the kind any decent person would feel watching someone get rejected over and over in public for something that was clearly not her fault. I told myself I was not getting involved, that this was none of my business, that alien mating customs were exactly the kind of thing humans on this station were warned to stay far away from during our first cultural briefing. I told myself a lot of things that week. None of them stopped me from walking past the medical archive twice a day, finding excuses to be near that food court at lunchtime, watching her from a careful distance, like I was some kind of nervous teenager, instead of a grown man with a cargo ship and bills to pay. On the 6th day, she caught me looking. I expected her to be annoyed, or embarrassed, or to simply ignore me the way she ignored everyone else who stared. Instead, she held my gaze steadily across the food court, her stone-gray eyes narrowing slightly, studying me the way you might study something unfamiliar and slightly puzzling. Then she stood up, picked up her tray, and walked directly toward my table. My heart did something complicated and fast. "You are the human who hauls cargo to the Varan mining colonies," she said. It was not a question. "Ethan Cole," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice came out. "Yes, that's me." "You have been watching me for 6 days," she said, still not sitting down, still studying me like I was a puzzle she had not decided whether to solve. Humans are not usually so patient with their curiosity. Most species on this station satisfied their curiosity about me within the first hour, then decided I was not worth the risk of finding out more. I did not know what to say to that. So I told her the truth, which felt like the only reasonable option left. "I wasn't trying to find out if you were dangerous," I said. "I was trying to figure out why everyone kept treating you like you were." Something shifted in her expression. It was small, barely there, gone almost as fast as it appeared, but for one moment, the careful blankness cracked, and underneath it, I saw something raw and tired and lonely in a way that made my chest hurt again. "That," she said quietly, "is not a question anyone has asked me in a very long time." She sat down across from me. Around the food court I noticed heads turning, quiet conversations pausing, the same careful, wary attention I had watched follow her for days now turning, just slightly, in my direction too. I did not know it yet, but I had just placed myself directly in the path of something the entire station had spent years learning to avoid. I did not know about the hollow line, or what had happened to the last male who tried to bond with her, or how close that failure had come to destroying him completely. I only knew that she was sitting across from me, studying my face with open curiosity for the first time in longer than she could probably remember, and that some quiet, stubborn part of me had already decided I was not going anywhere. "Tell me," I said, "why does everyone act like you're a bomb waiting to go off?" She looked at me for a long moment, weighing something, deciding something. Then, for the first time since I had arrived on Meridian Station, Illyra Sen began to tell someone the truth. "It would take longer than lunch to explain," she said. "And once I tell you, you will understand why every sensible person on this station keeps their distance. You may decide to do the same." "Try me," I said. She studied my face a moment longer, like she was searching for the fear that should have been there and was somehow not finding it. Then she folded her long fingers together on the table, took a slow breath, and began. What she told me over the next hour would change the entire direction of my life, though at the time I only understood that I had stumbled into something far bigger, far older, and far more dangerous than a simple case of bad luck in love. I did not know yet that her story was about to become mine as well. I only knew that I wanted to hear it, every word, and that for reasons I could not fully explain, I was no longer afraid. Illyra spoke slowly at first, choosing her words the way someone chooses steps across ice, testing each one before trusting it with her full weight. "My people bond for life," she said, "not with rings or ceremonies like your species. We bond through something called the joining, a transfer of nervous energy between two minds that happens once and cannot be undone. It links us so completely that we can feel echoes of each other's thoughts for the rest of our lives. It is considered the deepest form of love our species can offer." "That sounds beautiful," I said. "It is," she said. "For most people." She paused, and I watched her jaw tighten before she continued. "My family carries something called the hollow line. It is rare, passed down through only a handful of bloodlines across our entire species. It means the energy inside me during the joining is far stronger than normal. Most Cadron males can handle a normal joining without any danger at all. But joining with someone from the hollow line requires a mind strong enough to receive that extra force without breaking under it. And if it's too strong?" I asked, already dreading the answer. "The mind cannot process it," she said quietly. "It collapses inward. The person survives physically, but something inside them, the part that thinks and feels and remembers who they are, goes dark. Sometimes for days, sometimes forever. The food court around us kept moving, kept talking, kept living its ordinary life, but at our table everything had gone very still." "That happened to someone," I said. It was not a question. "His name was Threk Dovan," she said. "We were both very young. Our families had arranged the match years before we met, hoping the bond would strengthen ties between two important trading houses. He was kind to me before the joining, gentle. He used to bring me small stones from the mining routes he traveled, said each one reminded him of something about me. I believed, for the first time in my life, that I might actually be loved instead of simply tolerated." She stopped talking for a moment, staring at her folded hands. "The healers warned my family that his mind might not be strong enough," she continued. "They recommended we wait, test him further, prepare him properly. My father refused to delay the ceremony. He said waiting would insult the other family, that pride mattered more than caution. So the joining happened as scheduled. And it went wrong," I said quietly. "It went wrong within seconds," she said. "I felt it happen. That is the worst part, Ethan. I felt his mind trying to hold the connection, felt it strain like a rope pulled too tight, and then I felt it snap. He fell unconscious immediately. When he woke 3 days later, he did not know his own name. He did not recognize his family. He did not recognize me. I did not know what to say. There was nothing adequate to say. He recovered some memories eventually," she said. "Enough to function, enough to resent me for the rest of his life, though he never says so directly. He still lives on this station. You may have seen him. Tall, quiet, keeps to the lower cargo levels now instead of trading in the open concourse like he used to. That is what the hollow line does to the people who try to love us. Us, I repeated. How many others carry it? Very few, she said. And most of them chose never to attempt the joining at all, once word of what happened to Threk spread across the trading routes. Word travels fast between stations. By the time I was old enough to be considered for another match, every family with an eligible son had already heard the story. They did not need to meet me to decide I was too dangerous to risk. So every single rejection I've watched this week, I said slowly, was because of something that happened to someone else, years before you even met them. Fear does not require personal experience, she said. It only requires a story frightening enough to repeat. We sat in silence for a while after that. I found myself furious on her behalf, a feeling that surprised me with its intensity, considering I had known her for less than an hour. It was not fair. None of it was fair. She had been judged and sentenced and abandoned by an entire culture for a risk she had never chosen and could not control, punished endlessly for a single tragedy that had happened to someone else. "Why are you still telling me this?" I asked finally, instead of walking away like you probably should. She looked up at me, something searching in her expression. "Because you asked why," she said, "instead of asking how dangerous I am. Every other question I have ever been asked was really just a way of measuring risk. Yours was different. I did not have a clever response to that. I only knew that something had shifted inside my chest, something that felt dangerously close to responsibility, or maybe something closer to feeling. Over the following days, I found myself returning to that same food court every single day at the same hour, hoping to see her there. She began joining me without hesitation after the second time, and slowly, carefully, we built something that felt entirely new to both of us. She told me about her work cataloging medical records from a dozen species, how she had memorized the biology of creatures she would probably never meet in person just because it gave her something to focus on besides loneliness. I told her about hauling cargo between Meridian and the mining colonies, about the small satisfaction of fixing an engine that everyone else had given up on, about growing up on a crowded planet where humans had spent centuries fighting each other before finally looking outward to the stars. She listened to everything I said with a kind of hungry attention that told me clearly how rarely anyone had simply talked to her without an agenda. I learned more about the Cadron during those days than I had learned in my entire time on Meridian Station before meeting her. I learned that their bloodlines were tracked as carefully as royal lineages, that failed joinings were recorded permanently in public medical archives, available for anyone to search before considering a match. I learned that Illyra's failed joining with Threk Dovan had been searched, according to station records, over 400 times by different males considering approaching her, each one deciding the risk was too great before ever speaking to her directly. I learned too that the medical archive she worked in kept detailed data on every known case of the Hollow Line across Cadron history, and that she had access to every file. One evening, nearly 2 weeks after we first spoke, I found her staring at her terminal screen long after her shift should have ended, her expression unreadable in the low light of the archive. "What are you looking at?" I asked. She turned the screen toward me. It showed medical scans, dense with data I could not fully understand, charts and graphs describing something called neural resilience across different species. "I have been studying every recorded case of a failed joining, involving the Hollow Line," she said. "Every single case involves a Cadron partner. There has never been a recorded attempt with any other species." "Why not?" I asked. "Because the joining is a Cadron custom," she said. "No other species shares our biology in a way that would allow it. It has simply never been attempted." Something in the way she said it made my pulse quicken. "But could it be attempted?" I asked slowly. "With a different kind of mind, a different kind of biology?" She looked at me for a long moment, and I watched something dangerous and hopeful flicker behind her stone-gray eyes, something she seemed almost afraid to let herself feel. "Theoretically," she said carefully, "the danger comes from whether a mind is strong enough to absorb the extra force without collapsing. Cadron minds process thought in a very specific, very structured way, which may be exactly why the excess energy breaks them so completely. A mind built differently might respond differently. Nobody has ever tested it, because no other species has ever been foolish enough, or perhaps brave enough, to try. I felt the shape of an idea beginning to form in my mind, an idea so reckless that I almost laughed at myself for even considering it. Human minds are stubborn, I said slowly. We survive things we probably shouldn't. Extreme cold, extreme pressure. We've built entire civilizations on doing things everyone else said were impossible. Ethan, she said, and there was warning in her voice now, though it did not sound like she wanted me to stop. Do not say something you have not fully considered. I'm not saying anything yet, I said. I'm just asking questions. But we both knew, sitting there in the quiet archive with the weight of every failed joining in Cadron history glowing on the screen between us, that the question had already been asked, and that neither of us was going to be able to stop thinking about the answer. Word of our growing friendship had already begun spreading across the station by then, the way word always spreads in a place where everyone knows everyone's business within a day. I started noticing the same wary glances I had watched follow Alira for weeks now beginning to follow me too, traders falling quiet when I walked past. The same pitying look Vesk had given me on that very first day, now aimed squarely in my direction. Nobody said anything directly. Not yet, but I could feel the station holding its breath, waiting to see whether the strange, stubborn human who had befriended the Hololine would eventually do something the entire Cadron species had spent generations avoiding. I did not have an answer for them yet. I barely had an answer for myself. But that night, lying awake in my cramped cargo ship berth, staring at the ceiling while my engine coil hummed its familiar, uneven rhythm beneath me, I found myself turning the idea over and over, unable to set it down. Every warning I had heard since arriving on this station told me to leave it alone, to enjoy the friendship I had found, and nothing more, to avoid the fate of Threk Dovan, quiet and broken on the lower cargo levels. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw Alira's face in the food court on that very first day, chin lifted, spine straight, absorbing rejection after rejection with a dignity that should never have been asked of her. And some quiet, stubborn part of me had already begun deciding that I was not willing to let her carry that alone for the rest of her life, no matter what it might eventually cost me. 3 weeks after that night in the archive, I finally said the words out loud. We were sitting on the observation deck of Meridian Station, the one place on board where the noise of trading and gossip faded into something quieter, the stars stretching endless and silent beyond the reinforced glass. Alira had taken to meeting me there in the evenings, away from the food court and its endless watching eyes, and I had come to treasure those hours more than almost anything else in my life. I want to attempt the joining with you, I said. She went very still beside me. I had rehearsed this moment a dozen times in my head, imagining how I might explain myself calmly and reasonably, but the words came out plain and blunt instead, exactly as I felt them. You do not understand what you are asking, she said quietly, not looking at me, staring instead at the stars like she could not bear to see my face while she said it. I understand the risk, I said. You told me yourself. If my mind can't handle it, I could end up like Threk. I could lose myself completely. You could lose everything, she said, turning to face me now, her stone-gray eyes fierce, with something that looked like fear and fury tangled together. I watched it happen once already, Ethan. I felt his mind break beneath mine. I have relived that moment more times than I can count. I will not be responsible for it happening again, especially not to you. You wouldn't be responsible, I said. I would be choosing it. That's different. Is it? She asked. Threk chose it too, in his own way. His family pressured him, yes, but in the end, he agreed to the ceremony. Choice did not save him from what happened afterward. I did not have a perfect answer to that. I only had the stubborn certainty that had been building inside me for 3 weeks, growing heavier every single day I watched her brace herself against a lifetime of loneliness that she had never deserved. I've spent years hauling cargo through debris fields that could have crushed my ship at any moment, I said. I've flown through ion storms that killed 2 other pilots on the same route the same year I made it through. Humans do dangerous things every single day, Alira, because the alternative, giving up before we've even tried, has never sat right with us. I'm not saying this because I think I'm special. I'm saying it because I've decided the risk is worth it. Worth it for what? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper now. Worth it to prove a point to a station full of strangers? Worth it to be remembered as brave? Worth it, I said, because I don't want to watch you eat lunch alone, facing a wall for the rest of your life, while an entire species decides you're not worth the risk of loving. I don't care what everyone else has decided about you. I've made my own decision. For a long moment, she said nothing at all. Then, very slowly, she reached out and took my hand, her long fingers cool and careful around mine, like she was afraid I might disappear if she held on too tightly. If I say yes, she said finally, and if it goes wrong, I will have to live with what happens to you for the rest of my life. Do you understand that? I will remember your face exactly as it is now, and I will know I let you make this choice anyway. Then let's make sure it doesn't go wrong, I said. News that a human intended to attempt the joining with the last member of the Hollow Line spread across Meridian Station faster than any cargo shipment I had ever hauled. Within 2 days, I was summoned before the station's Cadron Elder Council, a group of 7 ancient silver-skinned figures who had overseen matters of bonding and bloodline for longer than most species had existed as spacefaring civilizations. They met in a circular chamber near the station's administrative core, lit by soft blue light that seemed designed to make everyone inside feel very small. You are aware, said the eldest of them, a Cadron named Vorash whose stone eyes had gone pale gray with age, that no human has ever attempted a joining. You are aware that we cannot promise your safety, that we cannot even predict with any accuracy what might happen to a mind so fundamentally different from our own. I'm aware, I said. You are aware, he continued, that the last male to attempt this with Illyra Sen specifically now lives in isolation, his mind permanently altered, unable to recall much of his former life. I'm aware of that too, I said. Then why, asked another elder, a sharp-eyed woman named Kessa, would you willingly walk into the same fate? I thought carefully before answering, aware that whatever I said next would be repeated across the entire station within hours, regardless of what I intended. Because I don't think it's the same fate, I said. Human minds don't work the way Cadron minds do. We're not more resilient because we're braver or stronger. We're just built differently, wired differently, and I think that difference might matter more than anyone here has considered. But even if I'm wrong, even if this goes badly, I would rather try and fail than watch someone I care about spend the rest of her life being punished for something that isn't her fault. The council members exchanged glances I could not fully interpret, some careful mixture of skepticism and something that might have been quiet respect. We cannot forbid this, Vorash said finally. Cadron law has no authority over human choice, and Illyra Sen is of legal age to consent to whatever risk she chooses to accept. But we want it recorded, clearly, that this council advised strongly against this attempt, and that whatever happens afterward is a consequence you both chose with full knowledge of the danger. Understood, I said. There is one more matter, Kessa added, her sharp eyes fixing on me with sudden intensity. If this succeeds, human, you will not simply be entering into a relationship as your species understands it. The joining binds permanently. There is no ending it afterward, no separation, no divorce as your culture practices it. You would be bound to Illyra Sen, and she to you, for the remainder of both your lives. Do you understand what you would be choosing, beyond simply the physical risk? I looked at Illyra, who had been standing quietly beside me throughout the entire council session, her face carefully composed, though I could see the tension in the set of her shoulders. I understand, I said. I'm choosing it anyway. The days leading up to the ceremony were the strangest of my life. Word had spread far beyond Meridian Station by then, carried along the trade lanes to neighboring stations and colonies. The story of a human attempting the forbidden joining, becoming something between gossip and legend before the event had even happened. Traders I had never met stopped me in the corridors to offer opinions, warnings, and occasionally quiet encouragement. Vesk, the old Cadron trader who had first warned me away from Alira weeks earlier, found me near the fuel counter one evening and studied me for a long moment before speaking. "I sold parts to Threk Dovin's father for 30 years before the ceremony," he said quietly. "I watched that family break apart afterward, slowly, piece by piece. I do not know if what you are attempting is brave or foolish. Perhaps it does not need to be only one or the other." "What would you do?" I asked him, "in my position?" He considered the question seriously, the way he considered every transaction, weighing value against risk with careful patience. "I think," he said finally, "that I would want to know I had tried, rather than spend my remaining years wondering what might have happened if I had been brave enough to find out." His words stayed with me more than any of the Elder Council's warnings had. Illyra and I spent our final evening before the ceremony on the observation deck again, watching the stars in silence for a long while before either of us spoke. "I need you to know something," she said eventually. "Whatever happens tomorrow, these past weeks have already changed something in me. For years, I believed the hollow line meant I was destined to live alone, that no amount of hoping would ever change what my own biology had decided for me. You made me question that belief, regardless of what happens during the joining itself. I wanted you to know that before we begin. I'm not doing this because I feel sorry for you," I said, wanting to be certain she understood that clearly. "I want you to know that too. I'm doing this because somewhere in these past weeks, without really planning it, I started caring about you more than I've cared about almost anyone in my life. The joining is just the way your biology happens to require that caring to be expressed completely. If your species bonded through shared meals instead of shared minds, I'd have said yes to that just as quickly." She smiled then, a real smile, wide and unguarded in a way I had never seen from her before, and for a moment, the weight of everything waiting for us the next day seemed to lift just slightly. "Humans are strange," she said. "Stubborn and strange, and occasionally, against every reasonable expectation, exactly what someone needed without knowing it." "I'll take that as a compliment," I said. "It was meant as one," she said. We sat together until the artificial night cycle of the station dimmed the lights around us, saying little else, simply existing side by side in the quiet, both of us aware that tomorrow would either bind our lives together permanently or take something from me that I might never fully recover. I did not sleep well that night. I do not think either of us did. But when the morning arrived and the medical technicians came to prepare the ceremony chamber, I found that my resolve had not weakened at all. If anything, it had settled into something calm and certain, the same feeling I remembered from the moment before flying my ship through my very first dangerous debris field years earlier, fear and readiness existing together instead of canceling each other out. Illyra met me outside the chamber, dressed in the pale ceremonial robes traditionally worn by those preparing for the joining, her expression steady, despite everything I knew she must have been feeling. "Are you ready?" she asked. "No," I said honestly, "but I'm going anyway." She reached out and took my hand one last time before the doors opened. "Then let us find out together," she said, "what a human mind is truly capable of." The doors slid open, revealing the softly lit chamber beyond, and together we stepped inside to face whatever waited for us on the other side of that choice. The ceremony chamber was smaller than I expected, round and quiet, its walls lined with soft glowing panels that pulsed faintly like a slow heartbeat. Two low seats faced each other in the center of the room, close enough that our knees nearly touched, with a thin silver band resting on a stand between them. Medical technicians moved around the edges of the room, attaching monitoring sensors to my arms and temples, their expressions carefully professional, though I noticed more than one of them glancing at me with open curiosity. Elder Vorash stood near the entrance, along with two healers, whose job, I understood, was to intervene immediately if something began going wrong. I tried not to think too hard about what that intervention might look like, or whether it would come in time. The silver band channels the initial connection, Illyra explained quietly as we sat down facing each other. Once it activates, our minds will begin to reach toward one another. If our biology is compatible, the connection deepens naturally, gradually, until it becomes permanent. If it is not compatible, I know, I said. You don't have to say it again. She nodded, and I watched her throat move as she swallowed hard. I need you to promise me something, she said. If you feel it becoming too much, if it feels like something inside you is breaking, you tell me immediately. Do not try to be brave for my sake. Do not try to endure it silently, the way your species sometimes does. Tell me, and I will do everything I can to slow it, even if it means the joining fails. I promise, I said, and I meant it. Elder Vorash stepped forward and lifted the silver band, holding it out between us. Once this begins, he said, it cannot be stopped by anything except the healer's intervention, and even then, only within the first few moments. After that point, the connection will run its course, for better or for worse. Are you both certain you wish to proceed? Yes, Illyra said. Yes, I said. He placed the band gently over both our wrists, connecting us with a thin strand of pale metal that hummed softly the moment it touched skin. For a few seconds, nothing happened at all. Then the world changed. It began as warmth, spreading up my arm from where the band touched my skin, gentle at first, almost pleasant, like stepping into sunlight after a long time indoors. I felt my heartbeat sync with something outside myself, a second rhythm layering over my own, and I realized with a jolt of wonder that I was feeling Illyra's heartbeat alongside mine for the first time. Then the warmth became pressure. It built quickly, faster than I expected, faster than Illyra's careful explanations had prepared me for. I felt something reaching into my mind, not violently, but insistently, like a tide pulling at the edges of my thoughts, testing their strength, searching for the boundaries of who I was. I gripped the edges of my seat, my breathing growing ragged, sweat beading along my forehead despite the mild temperature of the room. Ethan, Illyra's voice came, tight with worry. How does it feel? Strong, I managed. Stronger than I expected. But I'm still here. The pressure kept building. I began to understand, in flashes and fragments, what had happened to Threk Dovan years earlier. This was not simply an emotional connection, not simply two minds sharing feelings the way I had imagined. This was raw force, an entire second consciousness pressing against the structure of my own mind, searching for room to exist alongside it, and I could feel now exactly how a mind built too rigidly might crack beneath that pressure, rather than bend. My mind, it turned out, did not sit rigidly at all. I do not know how to explain what happened next in a way that fully captures it, but I will try. Where I had expected my thoughts to feel like walls, holding firm or breaking under pressure, I found instead that they moved. They bent and reshaped themselves around the pressure pushing into them, flexible in a way that surprised even me, adapting to the intrusion instead of resisting it directly. It was not comfortable, it was not painless, but it did not break. Something is different, Elder Vorash said sharply from across the room, studying a monitoring display with wide eyes. The neural patterns are not resisting the way Cadron patterns do, they are flowing around the intrusion. Is that good? Illyra asked, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining the connection. I do not know, Vorash admitted. This has never happened before. The pressure inside my mind kept building, and with it came flashes of memory that were not my own. I saw a childhood on a world I had never visited, tall silver buildings beneath a lavender sky, a young Illyra sitting alone at a long dining table while her family discussed her future in low, worried voices just out of earshot. I saw the moment she first learned what the hollow line meant for her chances of ever being loved. I saw Threk Dovan's face, kind and nervous, offering her a small polished stone from a mining route, and I felt, faintly, the shadow of her hope in that moment, followed by the crushing weight of what came after. I understood, in a way words could never fully explain, exactly what she had carried alone for years. "I can feel your memories," I gasped. "And I can feel yours," she said, her voice thick with emotion now. "Ethan, I can feel you, all of you. The debris fields, the ion storms, your mother's face when you left home, the fear you have never told anyone about, that you might not be brave enough for the life you chose. I feel all of it, and none of it frightens me." The pressure inside my mind reached its peak then, a moment of overwhelming intensity that made my vision blur and my whole body shake against the seat, every monitor in the room spiking with alarming readings. I heard one of the healers shout something urgent. I felt Elira's grip tighten around my hand, desperate and afraid. "Ethan, tell me if it's breaking," she said, her voice cracking. "Tell me now." I searched myself in that instant, honestly, the way I had promised her I would, looking for any sign of the fracture she feared, any sign that my mind was beginning to collapse the way Threx had years before. I found only strength, strange, unfamiliar, but undeniably present, holding firm even as her entire consciousness pressed fully against mine for the first time. "It's not breaking," I said, my voice barely above a whisper but absolutely certain. "Elira, it's not breaking. I'm still here." The pressure held at its peak, for what felt like an eternity, though the healers would tell me afterward it had only been a handful of seconds. Then, gradually, impossibly, it began to settle, the tide receding not because it had been pushed back, but because it had finally found the space it needed, folding into the shape of my mind rather than shattering against it. The silver band between us dimmed, its work complete, the connection no longer needing external force to sustain itself. I felt Elira's presence settle into my thoughts like something that belonged there, quiet and warm and permanent in a way I could not have imagined before that moment. "It worked," Elder Varash said, and for the first time since I had met him, his ancient voice carried genuine astonishment. "By every measure we understand, it worked." I looked across at Elira and found her staring back at me with tears streaming freely down her face, her expression a mixture of disbelief and joy, so raw it made my own eyes sting in response. "You're still you," she said. "I can feel it. You are completely, entirely, still yourself." "I told you," I said, my voice shaking with exhaustion and relief, and something that felt very much like triumph. "Stubborn, strange, and apparently exactly what your biology needed, even if nobody could have predicted it." The healers rushed forward to check my vital signs, their instruments confirming what Elira had already felt through our newly formed connection. My mind was intact. My memories were my own. My sense of self had not fractured, had not gone dark, had not been lost the way Threx had been lost years before in this very same chamber. I had survived the joining, and more than survived it. I had done something that, according to every record in the Kadron Medical Archive, had never been recorded as successful before. Not with the Hollow Line, not with anyone carrying Elira's particular danger inside them. As the technicians began removing the monitoring sensors from my arms, I became aware of a strange new sensation settling into the back of my mind, faint and steady, like a second heartbeat that would now, apparently, remain with me for the rest of my life. It was Elira, quietly present in a way I would need time to fully understand, connected to me permanently in a manner no human had ever experienced before. I did not know yet how the rest of the station would react to what had just happened inside that chamber, or how quickly word would spread across the trade lanes to every colony and station within reach. I did not know yet that I had just become something entirely new in the eyes of an ancient species, a living proof that their oldest fears about the Hollow Line had never accounted for minds built differently from their own. I only knew that Elira Sen was looking at me the way nobody had ever looked at her in return, and that whatever came next, we would be facing it together, permanently, in a way neither of us could undo even if we wanted to. Neither of us wanted to. News of what happened inside that ceremony chamber spread across Meridian Station faster than any story I had ever witnessed in my life, and within a single day, it had reached every trade lane connected to the station's network. By the time Illyra and I stepped out of the medical wing that evening, still adjusting to the strange new presence each of us now carried in the back of our minds, a crowd had already gathered near the observation concourse. Traders, dock workers, station officials, all of them watching us with an intensity that made me deeply uncomfortable after so many quiet weeks of simply being ignored or pitied. Vesk was among them, standing near the front, his stone eyes wide with something I had never seen from him before. Respect, maybe, or simple astonishment. "You survived," he said, his voice carrying more emotion than I had ever heard from him during our many transactions together. The healers said the connection completed fully. "Is it true?" "It's true," I said, and beside me, Illyra reached for my hand, lacing her fingers through mine in front of the entire crowd, without a trace of the careful blankness she used to wear like armor. A murmur rippled through the gathered crowd, spreading outward in waves, and I watched expressions shift from disbelief to something more complicated. Some faces held genuine wonder. Others, I noticed, held something closer to shame, particularly among the older Cadron traders who had spent years whispering warnings about the Hollow Line, treating Illyra's existence as a danger to be managed, rather than a person to be known. Over the following days, the reaction across Meridian Station settled into something I had not expected. Cadron medical researchers, the same institution that had recorded every failed joining attempt in Illyra's family history, requested permission to study what had happened between us, eager to understand exactly why a human mind had succeeded where so many Cadron minds had failed. Elder Vorash himself visited us twice that first week, his careful, formal manner softening slightly each time, as though he were still working through his own surprise at what he had witnessed. "We built centuries of caution around the Hollow Line," he admitted during his second visit, sitting across from us in the small quarters Illyra and I had begun sharing near the station's residential ring. "We assumed the danger was universal, that any mind attempting the joining, with someone like Illyra, would face the same risk Threkdovan faced. We never considered that the danger might be specific to the structure of our own minds, rather than something inherent in her biology alone." "Does that change anything?" Illyra asked quietly. "For others like me?" Vorash considered the question seriously before answering. "It changes everything," he said. "It means the Hollow Line is not the curse our people believed it to be. It simply requires a different kind of partner than our own species can safely provide. That is a very different truth than the one our medical archives have recorded for generations." I understood, listening to him speak, that Illyra's story was no longer simply her own. It had become something larger, a crack in an old, rigid belief that an entire species had built its customs around for longer than human history had existed. I did not fully grasp in that moment how far the ripples of what we had done would eventually spread. Word reached other stations within the trade network faster than I could have imagined. Within a month, I received a formal message from a research station 3 jumps away, asking whether I would be willing to speak with families of other Cadron carrying rare bloodline traits similar to the Hollow Line, families who had spent generations believing their daughters and sons were simply unlovable, doomed to isolation by their own biology. I agreed, though I made it clear from the beginning that I was not offering myself as some kind of solution to be duplicated. I had not saved Illyra because I wanted to prove a point about human resilience. I had done it because I cared about her specifically, because I could not stand watching her face rejection after rejection for something that was never her fault, and because some stubborn part of me had refused to accept that the story had to end the way everyone assumed it would. But my presence, and the undeniable fact of what had happened between us, opened conversations that had been closed for generations. Families began requesting proper medical studies instead of simply assuming the worst. A handful of other rare bloodline carriers, Individuals who had been quietly avoided by their own communities for years began reaching out to research stations, cautiously asking questions they had never dared ask before, wondering whether their own futures might not be as fixed and hopeless as they had always been told. Not every story that followed ended as fortunately as ours. I want to be honest about that, because pretending otherwise would dishonor the real risk Alira and I had taken. 2 other attempts at similar joinings, between individuals carrying rare traits and partners from species previously untested, ended without success in the months that followed, though thankfully without the catastrophic harm that had happened to Threk Dovan. The research remained new, uncertain, and genuinely dangerous, exactly as Illyra had warned me from the very beginning. But it remained possible now, in a way it had never been considered possible before, and possibility alone had already begun to change how an entire species thought about its own oldest fears. Threk Dovan himself came to find us nearly 2 months after the ceremony, the first time I had seen him since that day on the concourse when I had watched Alira brace herself against his public rejection weeks before we had even spoken. He moved slowly through the station corridors, his tall frame stooped in a way that suggested old habit rather than natural posture, his stone eyes carrying a quiet, permanent confusion that I understood now came directly from what had happened to him in that ceremony chamber years earlier. He found us near the observation deck, the same place where I had first told Alira I wanted to attempt the joining, and stood there for a long moment before speaking. "I heard what happened," he said finally, his voice careful, each word chosen slowly. "I wanted to see for myself that it was true." "It's true," Illyra said gently, and I noticed the careful compassion in her voice, free of any resentment I might have expected given everything he had put her through, however unintentionally. "I am glad," he said, and I believed him completely. "I do not remember much of what happened between us, Alira. I have been told the story many times, but the memories themselves remain broken, fragments I cannot fully piece together. I have spent years wondering whether I failed you somehow, whether there was something I should have done differently." "You did not fail me," Illyra said firmly. "The joining failed because our biology was never suited to each other, not because of anything you did or did not do. I am sorry for what happened to you, Threk. I have carried that sorrow for a long time." He nodded slowly, something in his expression settling, as though he had needed to hear those words for longer than either of us had realized. "I am glad you found someone whose mind could hold what yours needed to give," he said. "I hope, truly, that you will both be happy." He left soon after, moving slowly back down the corridor the way he had come, and I felt Illyra's hand tighten around mine, grief and relief tangled together in a way I could feel through our connection now, as clearly as I could see it on her face. "That conversation needed to happen," she said quietly, watching him go. "Thank you for staying while it did. Where else would I be?" I asked. Life on Meridian Station settled into something new after that, quieter than the initial storm of attention, though never entirely returning to the anonymous obscurity I had once enjoyed as a simple cargo hauler passing through on routine routes. Alira continued her work in the medical archive, though now with a research team studying the very records she used to catalog alone, searching for answers that might help others, carrying rare bloodlines, find the same possibility we had found together. I kept hauling cargo, though I found myself turning down routes that would take me too far from the station for too long, unwilling to be separated from the strange, steady presence I now carried permanently in the back of my mind. Some evenings, we returned to the observation deck together, watching the same stars that had witnessed every difficult conversation of our early relationship, and I found myself thinking often about how strange it was that a single stubborn decision, made mostly out of frustration and growing affection, had ended up unraveling assumptions an entire species had held for longer than my own civilization had existed. I do not think of myself as a hero. I want to be clear about that. Even now, looking back on everything that happened, I was not trying to prove anything about humanity's place among the stars, was not trying to become some symbol of what our stubborn, adaptable species could accomplish that others could not. I was simply a man who met a woman being punished endlessly for something that was never her fault, and who found himself unwilling to accept that punishment as permanent. It happened that human minds, built through millions of years of surviving conditions no other species had faced quite the same way, turned out to hold a kind of flexibility that Illyra's biology desperately needed. It happened that our stubbornness, the same trait that had gotten humanity into countless difficulties across our short history among the stars, turned out to be exactly the quality required to finally break a curse an entire species had assumed was permanent. Illyra tells me sometimes, late in the quiet hours when the station's artificial night cycle dims the lights around us, that she no longer dreams of standing alone, facing a wall in a crowded food court, bracing herself against another rejection. She dreams instead of ordinary things now, quiet things, the kind of dreams she says she never allowed herself to have before we met. I think about Vesk sometimes too, the old traitor who first warned me away from her on that very first day, and the way his expression had changed from careful pity to genuine astonishment over the following weeks. I think about Elder Vorash admitting, for the first time in his very long life, that an ancient truth his people had built entire customs around might never have been as absolute as they believed. Mostly, though, I think about that first afternoon on the concourse, watching a Cadran male recoil from Illyra like she was something to fear, and the quiet, stubborn decision I made in that moment to walk toward her instead of away. It was, without question, the most dangerous choice I have ever made. It remains, without any doubt at all, the best one.